And now for the star of the show. Please join me in welcoming Mary Louise Kelly, who will be interviewed by Rachel Hubbard, Executive Director and NPR Board Member.
But I'm in the newsroom by 8 or so, and our first, unless there's an interview in China, for example, where somebody's trying to get to bed and we got to get it done early, my first thing I have to show up and be briefed for is 9:30, the morning All Things Considered editorial meeting. And that is where all of the producers, editors who are working on the show on that day, because others will be doing longer term projects or out in the field reporting or something, but everybody who's actually trying to get All Things Considered on the air, from the most senior executive producer and senior hosts to the editorial assistants who have all of 2 weeks journalism experience under their belts, our interns, everybody's in there, and we pitch stories. And it's anarchy. There are some truly random stories pitched that never will make it onto your radio, and there is a process for screening some of those.
I want the list.
It's a list. But truly, the name of the show is All Things Considered, so you got liberty to really pitch any of the things. And there are some days where there is a big, very clear, it's election day. That's probably what we're going to lead with, and we're just going through the planning. And is there, we often are booking a kind of, I won't call them plan B, but a safety net of we know these guests are available if we can upgrade, like if we can get, the candidate on the air, if we can get, a newsmaker on there, if we can get somebody who's on the ground in place X where news is happening, we'll upgrade to that. So we're figuring it out, but it's one of my favorite parts of the day, because anything is still possible at 9:30 in the morning. Like, nobody's turned you down yet. The day hasn't turned upside down with massive breaking news yet. So it's a morning ritual of just getting to think, what am I actually curious about today? What do I really want to know? And who could answer that? And then there's a whole team of producers who work and try to get that person to come talk to us. And it's fun. And then inevitably by 10 o'clock, we've had to rip up those plans because 47 news cycles have unfolded while we've been in the morning meeting. And we keep adapting as the day goes on. And there is, at the front of the ATC area, massive, not quite that massive, but pushing it, like big screens showing all of the stories in play. What are we calling them? Who are the reporters? Who are the editors assigned? How long are we giving them? Do you have 2 minutes on air or 10 minutes on air? Is it going to be a live interview? Is it something we need to pre-tape? Either because, again, they're in China and they need to go to bed, or it's a book interview that might benefit from some editing just to make it a little bit more concise and clear. So you've got all this information, and all day long you see the stories moving. And I will tell you, it is not unusual at 4 o'clock Eastern when I go on air, 3 o'clock here, for not a single story at 4 p.m. to be finished, to be in hand. They're all still going through last minute edits and trying to, sound engineers working to brighten up the sound of a not particularly great phone line that the reporter was dealing with in Berlin. Or, oh my God, it came in 27 seconds long. We do not have 27 seconds to spare. Get it out, cut it, go, go, go. So you see the things moving around until I have a often violated but theoretically hard 30-second rule. If you're changing things, give me 30 seconds notice. So I've at least got something to say if that item is not ready and we're gonna go to plan B or C or D, which it happens.
So it's been a year in public media.
It's been a year.
And NPR has been under a lot of scrutiny over the last year. So let's just talk about it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about bias. I was having a conversation with a man last week in Stillwater, and he was asking specifically about bias as it relates to what we do include or what we don't include in stories. And are we expressing our bias by excluding one detail and including another. And how are you, I'm curious your take on that and how you balance it.
Yeah. So just to acknowledge and agree, it has been a really tough year for public broadcasting writ large, for our stations, and at the mothership, as we call it. And part of that has just been so much uncertainty. You can see things coming down the pike, but when are they coming? How big will they be? How real is it? When is the funding going to go away? To what extent can we fundraise, not against anything, but in favor of excellent journalism to try to offset that? And some of those, in fact, most of those remain live questions, which makes it a challenge to try to plan. We have this really cool idea for a new show. Can we do it? We could do it today. Is the funding going to be there next year? Do we do just a Hail Mary and hope yes, because we can't stop trying to do excellent journalism? So that's been the direction we're leaning, but it has added certainly an element of uncertainty and worry in a time that has already been plenty fraught with just the never-ending news cycle that we are covering. To the question of bias that you were asked, are we perfect? Absolutely not. Are we human? Yes. I so truly wish when people ask me about this that they could, for a day, or a week, come sit inside that 9:30 editorial meeting and hear how hard we are trying to cover our community, our country, the world in as comprehensive and fair and curious a way as is humanly possible. We are trying. How hard we think about the range of voices we want to bring on the air, the intense debates over, do we want to put that person on air? What are the pros, what are the cons? And to me, the driving question is always, how will it advance our knowledge or understanding of an issue, of a topic, of a moment, of a situation? And if it will, let's put the person on air. I am always in favor of bringing more voices into the tent, including ones who I may disagree with or even really intensely dislike. I'm human. I have opinions too. I have baggage that I bring into the whole conversation. But it's kind of not about me, and my baggage and dislikes are actually deeply bipartisan. I can find things to disagree with on both sides of the aisle. I would just rather, if somebody is in a position of power, making decisions that affect my country and my world, I want to hear from them. I want to hear why. I want to hear what's informing their thinking, how they came to think about something. There's always a why. Why someone has come to believe that something is the right path, that this is the right way to do something. Let's hear that. Let's hear the story. Let me challenge you if you're saying something that's misleading or that does not comport with facts that we've been able to verify. I'm going to jump in and try to correct the record to the best of my ability, but I'd rather hear from people. So those are the conversations we're having every day, is almost bending over backward to try to bring voices into the tent. And again, acknowledging we are imperfect, as is every news organization. One of the things NPR has done in the last year is introduce an extra kind of uber level of, we call it, was the backstop, now we're calling it editorial review, but it's everything you hear on All Things Considered has been edited, it has been fact-checked. It now goes, once it's been through a full edit, to an extra level where they're going through line by line, just looking at what language we use. Are we absolutely sure we nailed down that quote? Are we absolutely sure we don't need to reach out to somebody who may have a view counter to the person we're interviewing for their comment? So we're trying, and I am open to all of the questions that have been raised, but I actually think we're doing our best and doing a really strong job of trying to tell what is a very complex, very charged, very partisan story of the conversation unfolding in our country right now.
Has there been a moment, you mentioned that you have these very strong thoughts that are bipartisan. Has there been a moment where you realized your perspective might be getting in the way of the story that you were telling, and how did you adjust?
I find that it's a small handful of issues, because I am temperamentally suited to being a reporter, in that I'm curious about a lot of different sides of a story and actually walk into many stories with remarkably open-minded views, I think. There's some issues that I find hard. I have views on gun control and gun laws that are informed by things that have happened to people I've known and loved, and I find that one where I wrestle to keep my own preconceived notions out of a conversation and be open-minded. I'll just say that outright. I think more what I don't know if I struggle with it or if I'm leaning into it now, but I am finding one of the things that cuts across all of the divides in our country is when you can find a moment of common humanity, of shared experience. I keep asking people, who are fellow parents about their kids, because we can all relate to certain aspects of parenting wherever you are on the political spectrum. And I raise that just to, I don't know, I was trained as a reporter, you keep yourself out of the story, you're not the story. If you're having a real emotional reaction to something that someone is telling you, if it's breaking your heart, how much do you need to hear of that? I am your proxy on air reacting to someone who's, maybe describing the worst day of their life to me. If I'm interviewing you after a hurricane has blown down your house, or after your country has just been invaded, or name the tragedy that we invite people to come on air and talk to us about. And I do wrestle with that sometimes, trying to figure out what's the right amount of me to hear just a fellow human reacting to something, and how much does that really not matter, and you just want me to shut up and listen to the person who's talking.
So I'm going to shift gears a little bit towards national security. You started the intelligence beat at NPR after 9/11, and you've spent a great deal of your career covering this. Why did you decide to set that up? And it's not exactly like walking into the CIA and saying, hey, let me talk to somebody is the most welcoming or the easiest beat to set up, I guess.
It is not the easiest beat to set up. I have listened to my colleagues who cover the Pentagon full-time right now, and the challenges they are facing because of changes to the Pentagon press policy, changes which NPR is on the record opposing, and which I personally oppose. I don't see how you can be a reporter and sign a pledge saying I won't even ask about information until it's authorized and released to me. I mean, that's the definition of being a reporter, is nosing around and trying to figure out, well, what are they not telling us? But I've laughed a little bit at the gripes from my colleagues who cover the Pentagon that they can no longer wander around the Pentagon freely in the hallways, that they no longer have a pass and, to be able to report on site. They can't go to the daily press briefings, because I'm thinking, if you cover the CIA and the National Security Agency, you are never just wandering around Langley. You don't have a pass. They do not ever tell you what they're doing. They won't even tell, if you call the press office and ask what is for lunch in the cafeteria, you get it. I can neither confirm nor deny, no comment. So it's a tough beat to start. And I mean, in seriousness, almost everyone you're trying to get to talk to you has a security clearance. Some of them get polygraphed regularly, and one of the questions they are asked is, have you had any unauthorized contact with the press? And pretty much any contact with the press is not authorized. So they are risking potentially their jobs, potentially their pension to talk to you. And I always have taken that very seriously. It matters to get it right. It matters to set clear ground rules in terms of what I'm reporting and how I'm attributing that. But it seemed like such an interesting challenge from the start. Like one of the hardest beats and one of the most, the stakes are so high. And in the years that I was launching that beat, it was just at the center of everything after 9/11, and the war in Iraq the war in Afghanistan was underway, the war in Iraq was starting, and it was ironically one of the rare moments where, because of investigations into what had happened at Abu Ghraib and the big 9/11 investigation, people who had lived their lives and careers undercover, people who, if you Google them, you will get nothing, were being subpoenaed to testify publicly. And suddenly, you had a name, you had a face, you could walk up to them in the hall, and they still wouldn't talk to you, but at least was a starting point. And I always have found and continue to find it a really fascinating window into the way that this nation conducts foreign policy, and trying to find stories that will resonate when they don't affect many of our daily lives is another really interesting challenge. How do you find those stories? How do you tell them? So I'm still intrigued by that.
So I'm going to ask a question about transparency. It's courtesy of Kenneth Sewell. I don't know where you are, but I appreciate the question. How do you balance transparency for the public with the stakes of national security? For example, when you learned and reported on the disbanding of the unit charged with searching for Osama bin Laden, I'm guessing defense officials weren't too excited about that information getting out. And so why do we deserve to know as the public? Yeah. Why is it important for us to know?
Well, there is a natural tension between my job as a reporter and a government official's job. It is my job to try to learn as much as I can and share it with the public, and let you make up your own minds what you think we should be doing and what you want to make of it. That's the job. It is, a government official's job to not always be quite so forthcoming with information. Because of my training and what I do, I think I tend to come down on the side of the public's right to know. And I look at a lot of the reporting that's come out, in those years since 9/11 about what our government was doing in the name of the United States and with US taxpayer dollars that never would have come to light if investigative journalists hadn't turned it up. You think of the detention and rendition programs that the CIA ran after 9/11. I think the public deserved to know. I have had conversations where, you're careful, obviously, and you always, as you're digging around on the story, you're trying to pick your moment of when you go to the agency and seek official comment, because that can go a couple of different ways. Sometimes they will leak it to a competitor to get out in front of the story that you feel like you're about to break. But go to them and say, this is what we're thinking of reporting. Can you confirm? Can you give us somebody on the record? Can you give me official comment? And are there risks that we may not be aware of that we should be factoring in as we decide whether to publish or broadcast this? And I have had conversations where we have been asked not to publish, and on one of them we agreed not to, because as far as we could see, there was a risk that I couldn't fully measure from my limited vantage point. You only know what you know. Even if you have the most senior official at the White House or CIA telling you something, they only know what they know. And it turns out there's a lot of just because something is classified doesn't mean it's true. With the bin Laden unit, that story, we broke the news that the CIA had disbanded the bin Laden unit when he was still the number one, most wanted man on every most wanted list. And that came about because I got assigned to do a update on the hunt for bin Laden, which was a story I felt I had done a million times, and I couldn't figure out a way to do it in a fresh way. So I decided to flip it around and ask, who's looking? There were a lot of divisions and branches of our government across the Pentagon and across the intelligence agencies that were looking for bin Laden, but whose actual job was it? Who was running it? And I started asking and started asking and started asking, and I sat down with an official who had agreed to speak on background, not on the record. And I said, well, I guess the head of the bin Laden unit. And he said, well, you should ask about that. That's all he said. So I started asking. And the way that works is often you start making calls and you start asking about it, and the officials you're reaching are saying, well, what do you know? They don't want to talk until you've given them something. And you, at that point, know nothing, and you admit it, and they know nothing, and you hang up. Then, a few phone calls later, you dig up something, you call the first person back, say, now I'm hearing this. Would you steer me away from that? Who else should I be calling? And you start building it.
So one of the interviews that probably is most memorable for many people in this room is the Mike Pompeo interview. You've said it was one of your most memorable interviews, even in our discussions today. So remind us of what happened that day.
I had been asking for an interview with then Secretary of State in the first Trump administration, then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, for ages. And he's a busy guy, and I had recrafted the pitch depending on what was in the news. I think at one point it was Syria focused, and at one point it was Taiwan focused. And then in early 2020, the US stepped up to the brink of war with Iran. Trump ordered the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani in Iran, and that sent shockwaves throughout the region. And as it happened, I had a visa to go report from Tehran, leaving the next day. So we get on the plane not knowing if we're going to be at war by the time we land or if they will honor the visa when we get there. They did. We were able to go in and report, and I interviewed a number of Iranian officials who were very critical of the Trump administration and Pompeo specifically, as one would expect in a moment when these two countries, which didn't have diplomatic relations and weren't friends in the first place, but were on the brink of war. And magically, while I was in Tehran, the State Department came back and said, we would love to give you an interview with the Secretary when you get back. Great. So I was given 10 minutes to go to the State Department and interview him, like the 10-minute interview slot. And you can actually get a lot done in 10 minutes when you're focused. And my plan was to use those 10 minutes to ask about Iran, obviously, and also to ask about Ukraine, which then, as now was in the headlines, Russia had not yet launched its full-on invasion, but the Senate was in the middle of an impeachment trial of the President of the United States, and that was what became the first impeachment trial. We didn't know there would be a second one. But they were in the middle of that, and it had to do with President Trump's interactions and the infamous phone call with Zelensky of Ukraine. And all of the people being called to testify worked for Mike Pompeo. It was, the US ambassador to Ukraine and others. So I didn't see how you could sit down with him and not ask about it. We did. He was very, very not happy to be asked about Ukraine. And so much so that they ended the interview early, just said, and we're done.
You get 6 minutes?
I think I got just short of 9. I think I got 8 minutes something, somewhere around 9 minutes. So I thanked him, and he said nothing.
I'm flinching.
And then he left the room. We were on the 7th floor of the State Department in a beautiful reception room, and his whole team was sitting with chairs lined up against one wall, and I brought up producer and editor and our State Department correspondent, Michelle Kellerman, and somebody who was going to file digital copy if we made any news. And They're all lined up. And so fine, so we started packing up, and then his staffer, who had helped me arrange the interview, came back out and said, come with me, just you, not your team, just you. And so I got taken back to his offices on the 7th floor at the State Department, and he screamed at me for about the same amount of time as, about 9 minutes, about the same amount of time I'd gotten. And forgive my language, but I would like to quote accurately. He said, "Do you think Americans care about fucking Ukraine?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "Could you even find Ukraine on a fucking map?" And I said, "Yes, I could." And so he opened the doors to his office and asked for his team to bring in a map. And it was a strange map that had no writing on it at all, no borders drawn of just blobs of like continents. And I pointed to Ukraine, and he said, "People will hear about this." And I said, "Yeah, they will." And I thanked him again for his time and left. And we have, and still happily, unlike our colleagues at the Pentagon, we have a bureau at the State Department, as a lot of big news organizations do. I call it a bureau. It's about the size of this table. But there's space for a desk and a computer and a microphone, and it's hardwired to headquarters. So we went to the booth, and Michelle Kellerman helped me set up the line, and we went live on Morning Edition. And this feels important. We shared the highlights of the Iran portion of the interview, which was also newsy, and then the Ukraine portion of the interview, which is where it got very contentious. And in that live hit on Morning Edition, that's where we left it. On All Things Considered later that afternoon, we shared the entire interview with Pompeo in full. No edits, not even excising an or an ah or a sneeze or whatever. Like, it just exactly as it unfolded, because I wanted people to hear it exactly as it had unfolded. And I debated, do we share the map quiz part? Because it was on the record, but it was not on tape. And I thought, what if he denies it? Like, what if I get in a he said, she said thing with the Secretary of State? And also, more critically, to the earlier point, I'm not there to do some kind of gotcha interview with the Secretary of State. I'm there to do an interview about US foreign policy in the hopes that it will advance our understanding of what policy is on Iran and on Ukraine. Does this advance that? Like, what's the public interest served in sharing that moment? It doesn't need to be about me. It doesn't matter whether I can find Ukraine or not on a map, which I can. And we talked it through amongst editors in the newsroom that day and decided it felt important for Americans to see how our nation's top diplomat conducts himself. It felt important because it is explicitly part of his role, as opposed to, say, the Treasury Secretary, to advance American interests at home and abroad. And those interests involve journalism and the role of a free press to ask questions in our democracy. And so we called the State Department. I said, I'm planning to air the interview in full. I'm planning to include the map quiz. If you have any further comment or context you would like to share, please do. They did not. It aired. It made headlines worldwide. And the next morning, Pompeo put out a statement on State Department letterhead calling me a liar. And that's a weird moment.
It doesn't feel very good.
No.
Did it make you question your own reality? Because as a journalist, for speaking from my own perspective, when people have, like, did I do that right? Did I,
You're always wondering, did I handle that the way I should? And I, in that case, thought, yeah, like I did my job. That was the job, was to show up and ask questions on behalf of, I think, many Americans who probably had the same questions, certainly on behalf of all of the diplomats and State Department officers who worked there, who don't get to put those questions to their boss. Got a million interview requests to talk about it and say what had happened, and I thought, let's let the interview stand. The journalism stands. Our CEO, John Lansing, did one interview on All Things Considered that afternoon, not with me, and I had no input into it. I knew it was happening, but did not see any of the questions or know what he would say until we were live, in which he forcefully defended our journalism. And the whole newsroom stood with our reporting, and it meant the world. And it also, it was such a stark contrast in that moment, having just come from Iran, where I also had a contentious interview with the foreign minister there, where journalists don't have a constitution that protects their rights to do their job. And I'm grateful to all of you coming here and standing with your local station and with NPR. Nationally, this matters, and it matters that we are aware of it and we support it and we protect it.
So I want to flip to you personally, because we know you professionally, but we don't know much about Mary Louise as a person. So you covered spies and wars and politics, but what's a moment that made you stop being a reporter and just be a person?
Years before I was putting questions to Mike Pompeo, I was a Pentagon beat reporter. And my side of the beat was, covering a lot of aspects of our defense policy, but one of the aspects of the job was I traveled with the defense secretary when he traveled. Always been a he, still is. Wherever they go, there's press traveling with them and reporting on what deals are being cut and who they're meeting and what the agenda is and how U.S. defense interests are being advanced or not abroad. In the years that I covered the beat, the U.S. was still engaged in active combat in Afghanistan and Iraq, so that was part of the gig. And on one trip, I was with the SecDef, then Robert Gates, as we were flying into Baghdad from southern Iraq. And I don't know how it works now, how they get a cabinet secretary around in a place like Iraq, but then war was active, there was a green zone. You flew the secretary into the green zone, and then they never wanted to put him in a car on the street in a motorcade. So he was moving around by helicopter, which meant the press corps trying to cover him is also being moved around, like to our first press conference, by helicopters. And so we've just pulled into Baghdad, we're in the green zone, we've landed. They touch the Blackhawks down like one at a time so that there aren't 7 lined up as sitting ducks, because there was still some stray incoming fire, so we're all in body armor and helmets and the rest. And he gets the first Black Hawk, and then he's off. And then the most senior generals and admirals traveling with him get second, and they work their way down as the reporters are sitting there, fodder for incoming fire, waiting for whatever, the 7th helicopter. And at some point while I'm standing there on this runway, waiting for our Black Hawk, my phone rings, and it is the school nurse back home in Washington. And I can't quite hear what she's telling me because I'm hard of hearing in the first place. Also, it's really loud when you're in a war zone and there are helicopters landing. So I'm saying, can you speak up? Can you? And she tells me my youngest son is sick, and how quickly can I get there? And I'm like, I mean, I think that was probably my reaction. I'm embarrassed to say I probably started laughing and was like, lady, if you could see me, like, it's not anytime soon. And then she did start screaming, and she said, I don't mean to pick him up and bring him home. I mean, he's really sick. He was 4 at the time. He's really sick. He's struggling to breathe. We need to get him to a doctor, or I think the hospital now. Where are you? And I was trying to do the time zone calculation, think where is my husband, where is the babysitter, like who can get there? And as I'm trying to answer her, I lose cell phone signal and I have to get in the helicopter because they're not waiting for me. And we take off, and it ended up being several hours before I could get a connection through to Washington again and find out he's okay. But I had a moment up in this helicopter in body armor, crying, as I am still now, thinking, what am I doing? I love my job, and it's important, and I worked really hard to get here, and I think I'm pretty good at it. But I don't know if my 4-year-old is breathing. Like, what am I doing? And it was one of many moments in my career where I have struggled with trying to be good at my job and be a good mom and good to my family, which I suspect is something that resonates for many of us. And it kind of, at the end of the day, doesn't really matter if you're in Iraq or just like, you know, in Little Rock. It's if you're not home, when that call comes in, you're not home. And on the flight back to Andrews Air Force Base, I started thinking about, okay, what's plan B? Because right now with my family, this doesn't work. And I left NPR a few months after that and was around and wrote a couple of novels and eventually went back, obviously. And my 4-year-old is fine and is now a very healthy, thriving, breathing 19-year-old. But you don't know that in the moment, and you're always trying to figure it out. And one of my bright lines in those moments where you absolutely need to be home for something that is important to your family and your kids, and you absolutely need to get on the plane for this assignment that you agreed to take that's really important, and you so want to go do it. And one of my bright lines ever since has been, when those two come into conflict, my family wins. Because somebody else can get on that plane. They won't do it the way I did, but somebody else can go, and there will always be another story, always be another war, there'll always be another helicopter. But my son is not going to be 4 years old and need me in that way. So that has governed some of the choices I have made over the years. I don't know, right or wrong, but it's the path I took.
And you wrote a memoir
I did.
that really addresses
That gets
some of
to
that.
some of that.
Yeah.
Gets to some of that. How hard we're all trying, and I'm speaking for myself, how often I've beaten myself up for my inability to be in the helicopter in Iraq and able to help my son when he's sick. I will close on a slightly happier note, which is not only is my 19-year-old okay and fine, but when I was writing a memoir about kind of how I'd gotten to that point, and all of those choices came into sharp relief when suddenly my older son was a senior in high school, and I realized that soccer was the most important thing to him in the entire world, and that his soccer games were weekdays at 4 p.m. when I have a conflict, so I had missed all of them, and that didn't feel like a huge deal, because there were so many thousand more there's like a million soccer games, and I was like, I'll figure this out next season I'll figure it out. And suddenly I was out of next year's. If I was gonna figure it out, I needed to show up then. And so I wrote a book about trying to reconcile that. And being a reporter, I interviewed my son for the book and asked him, like, the central question, was there ever a moment where you really needed me and I didn't come? Because I was working. And I will tell you that he gave me the hardest look, the hardest stare, and then he looked down at the floor for about forever, and I thought, oh my God, like he's got a list that he's gonna give me, like the litany of grievances of his entire childhood, and I asked for it. And he finally ended up looking back at me and saying, there probably have been, Mom, but I can't remember any of them, and Anyway, I need to go. Can I have $20 for Chipotle? We're doing just fine here. The kid's okay.
Sorry.
It's real.
It is so real. In public media, we have a bit of a reputation. You know, there have been Saturday Night Live skits, etc. And
Should we be knitting as
yeah,
we
I know,
continue
right?
the interview?
My staff was teasing me. They said that we were going to be between two ferns tonight, and so I'm really disappointed that we're not. If I'm
I
being
would like
honest.
to note I've been in Oklahoma for less than 24 hours and I have already been given 2 tote bags.
Anyway,
Anyway,
we're on brand.
You
We're
were
on
saying.
brand, if nothing else. So you're one of the toughest interviewers in the business, a very serious journalist. But I want to know what the most un-NPR thing is about you.
oh my God, most un-NPR thing. You stumped me. Because I'm pretty on brand. Like, I would rather eat tofu than steak any other day.
I know, well, so
any
that's
day
what
of
I
the
was
week.
wondering. Like, is there a thing?
Most un-NPR thing. Can I flip it on you and buy myself a second? What's the most un-NPR thing about you?
Oh, man.
You asked. You brought it up.
I know. I should have had an answer for this.
I know. I don't know that this is the most exciting thing I could say, but I would say we work in radio, public radio. We all dress like we work in public radio, and it did not get better with the pandemic and the return to work. It's like slid off the cliff, and I was just at a point in life where I'm like, I'm 50 years old. I'm not buying a whole new athleisure wardrobe. This is who I am. This is how I dress. So my producers make fun of me because these are like one of the lower pairs of heels that I own. And I try and look at you in your stilettos.
I know.
That is very un-NPR.
I didn't put those on until tonight, if I'm being honest.
I'm a lady who loves stilettos, I will say that. And I put on makeup every day and freshen my lipstick before I go do All Things Considered, which, again, is for the benefit of no one. Like, if Juana happens to be in the studio with me that day, she's like, nice red lipstick, why? No, it's like,
So do they like dress
like
up?
putting on your power suit and feeling ready
I know.
for, I'm ready
There's
for
something to
whatever
be
it throws
said.
at me. Yeah.
So they like dress up as you for like Halloween? Because I will tell, you don't know this. Do you know this? Our staff last week, Ryan LaCroix, was out because his son was having a medical procedure. And our staff started an entire Slack channel because they were going to dress as Ryan for Halloween. Like with like skin hats.
Good. I hope it was captured for posterity.
Well, he wasn't there, so they were like, could we do it on Monday?
Right.
So you're lucky they didn't wear their costumes all tonight.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like that we're fairly on brand with the tote
Yeah.
bags and those sorts of things, but I just wondered. I needed to know if there was something just totally unserious about Mary
I'm
Louise
sure there
Kelly.
is. It can be very silly, as occasionally comes through on air.
Thinking about independent journalism, public radio and news more broadly has long been about providing information that surprises and often challenges. Do you think that there's still an audience for that kind of journalism? Do you think the audience for that kind of journalism that we have branded ourselves around is shrinking? I don't think so, but
I do think there is an audience for that kind of journalism. And I also think there is room for NPR and for public media to evolve. I know that, as sad as I am to report, my 19-year-old does not get his news driving around listening to me do a 2-hour general interest, wide-ranging news magazine on FM radio. That is not how he gets his news, even though he was brought up, strapped into the back seat, unable to ever listen to anything else. But does he value that kind of journalism? Absolutely. He's just finding it in different places and in different formats. So the challenge, I think the storytelling continues. I mean, we all know the possibilities of audio, or if anything, being amplified by, the proliferation of podcasts and different ways of getting what we do. I think the power of the human voice, you would expect me to say this in my job, but it's so real. One of my favorite interviews I've done was during the pandemic, at the very beginning when there was scary news coming out of Wuhan, China, and no one quite knew what was happening. They went into lockdown well before we had many documented cases here, and I was trying to figure out what's going on in Wuhan, like what is happening, how can we find out? And had our producers geolocating anybody who was tweeting from that region in English, and can we contact them and will they get on the phone and talk to me? Long story short, we find this guy who's a consultant who's been based in Wuhan for a couple of years, who is quarantined and living there and hasn't been able to leave his apartment. And I called and just talked to him about what that is like, and we aired the conversation with some stranger on the other side of the world who was having the most boring day ever, like hadn't left his apartment in a week. He had nothing to tell me but just, what do you see out of the window? How are you getting your news? What are you eating? Like, are you eating ramen out of a packet again? Like, what are you eating? And we kept airing those conversations as America went into lockdown and the pandemic ramped up here, and people were listening as we got to know each other. I talked to him. He was the first person I called when he was able to leave quarantine, and he went and he ordered a pizza, and he was so excited. And we had a whole conversation on air. What's your favorite kind of pizza? He likes Hawaiian. Like, who cares? Who cares? But it was so human. Like, he's eating the first thing that isn't a packet of ramen or dry cereal in, I can't remember how long he wasn't able to go out. It was like 2 or 3 weeks. We talked about his love life, because I was like, are you really all alone? You have no neighbor you can lean out, say hi to across the alley or something? And he was like, no, I'm all alone. I've been trying to meet the right woman, but it's not exactly conducive to dating to be in quarantine. So the last interview I did with him, he'd met someone and he was in love and he thought he was going to propose, and he said, I hope you'll come to the wedding. And I did not make it to Wuhan for the wedding, but it was that shared, he was an ordinary person who suddenly found himself in an extraordinarily weird situation. And just being curious and asking questions and listening about it. So many people have followed up to ask me, like, so did he get married? What happened? How's he doing? What's happening in Wuhan? Because they all connected with that. And so I'm a huge believer in that, and that the power of the human voice to connect us across time zones and languages and not remotely shared experience is real. Like, if you can do that with a stranger in Wuhan, we should be able to do that with our fellow Americans. So I'm a believer in the power of storytelling, and that this will continue, and that the work we do still has a role.
So I'm curious about the role of being a consumer in news. Jalal wanted me to ask this question, and he was thinking a lot about the Holocaust and thinking back about history and about the number of people who were killed, and there were things that we didn't know, we couldn't have known because the stories hadn't emerged. But as we think about other war zones, such as Gaza, where we are seeing just atrocities.
Horrific,
what is our
unthinkable things happening,
responsibility as consumers? Because I think many times we've talked about news fatigue and things like that, because you feel powerless in those moments. And so should there be a role for somebody who's consuming news in those moments that are really difficult, and what should that be?
That's a big question, and there's a lot of layers to it. I guess I'll start by saying I understand the news fatigue. I work in news. It's hard for me to turn it off. It is my job, but it is real. The news can be so much, so unsettling. And I say that, like, whatever your politics, we just are living in a cyclone of news chaos that it never stops. The fire hose is just so overwhelming that there comes a point where you think, for my sanity, I need to turn it off. So I get that. I am finding the way that I want to create news and the way that I'm consuming it is changing in some ways. I can't just stay plugged into my phone at all times of the day or night. I would lose my mind. And so I am finding ways, and I am trying to find ways to do that on air. Sometimes the answer isn't like, this happened and then this happened and then we got to tell you this and this. It's pick your target, pick one story. Try to tell that well, try to tell it thoroughly. Try to maybe make it smaller and more human and more personal. The shutdown is a big, overwhelming, complex thing, and we're now on day 35, and it doesn't look like it's going to end, and it's depressing. If you can find one story of someone being impacted, how they are coping, how they are trying to make things better, how it's opened, I don't mean to make light of the many real people who are truly suffering paycheck to paycheck and the government programs that are having issues. But there's a guy who set up a hot dog stand right outside NPR headquarters, like a proper wheel it down the street hot dog stand. And it stands out, A, because we never had a hot dog stand until 2 weeks ago, and B, because he wears a very nice suit. So being reporters, people started stopping and asking, and he's on government shutdown and hasn't gotten a paycheck and has been told not to report to work, and he's had a long-standing dream of opening a hot dog stand, so he's doing it. And we did a story on it, and now he's got a line that wraps around the block that is, he's living his best life. Again, I'm not making light of the many people who have not found their best life through this government shutdown, but if you can find a story of, here's a human doing something interesting in this moment, let me tell you that one story, you can wrap your arms around that. I'm also trying to find ways to kind of slow down the news cycle, so instead of telling you this happened and the next minute this and the next minute this, let me take a step back and look at, here's the week. Let me help you make sense of the week. And not that I have figured it all out by any stretch, but here are the questions on my mind as I try to make sense of the week, and let you listen in real time on what kind of questions I'm asking and what questions we don't have the answers to yet, and just put it all out there. I find that helpful. The Gaza situation and our ability to report on it or not is a case unto itself. I mean, we are seeing true horrific events unfolding there, and we are constrained because from the beginning of the war, they have not allowed international reporters in to document it. NPR has gotten correspondence in a couple of occasions on very short, very heavily supervised by the IDF, the Israeli military, and by no means free to just roam around and asking people things. We have a producer who's been on the ground who is Gazan, who we offered and would have been able to get out early in the war, and he said, no, I want to stay, I want to cover this. Anas Baba, and massive credit to him, he is helping tell the story of his town and his people and his home and his family, and in unimaginably challenging circumstances where he files his report and he doesn't know if he's when he's going to eat again, or where he's sleeping that night. So I'm grateful to him and eager to continue pushing for access so that we can go in and tell a fuller story of that war, because it's absolutely incumbent on us as journalists and as humans to get in there and try to tell the story of what is happening and why.
You've talked a lot about international bureaus tonight, and you've worked around the world. We think about NPR also as the network, about the boots on the ground that are in local communities.
As do we.
Why are local stations important to NPR? Why can't you just do this work by yourselves?
Yeah. On a practical level, I'm at headquarters in Washington trying to tell the stories and bring you the news of what is being decided in our nation's capital and how it impacts you. I can't do that from where I sit. So we are constantly, whether it's the shutdown, whether it's immigration, whether it's what's happening to your healthcare premiums, whether it is what is the effect of tariffs on this sector of our farming agriculture industry, we're constantly trying to figure out, again, make it smaller, make it human. How can I tell a big national story of this trade war that Trump is launching with China? How do I tell it, like, what's the impact on a hog farm in Oklahoma? Like, I don't know those people. I'm not in your community. Y'all are. You can tell those stories and amplify and let the whole nation listen in on this is how it's affecting like a family that worked really hard to have this farm. Like, let's hear it and hear how this is playing out for them. So that's one thing. Y'all can tell stories that the nation needs to hear that I can't tell without y'all's work. We've gotten a lot of questions with rescission and defunding. Why should the government ever have been involved with funding, local newsrooms when we can all just, we don't need your station to hear NPR. Everybody can stream it on their phone. You can stream it straight from the network. Yes, technology exists to do that, but what are you streaming? A bunch of talking heads sitting in a studio in Washington? Like, that's not advancing our knowledge or understanding of what's unfolding in our country. We're missing, if we don't have the local newsrooms, we're missing local reporters who are out telling us the story of their community. So we can't stream that if it doesn't exist. And the third piece of it is it's a little harder to find the data for, but if we're talking about trust or lack thereof in our media. There is no reason somebody sitting here in Oklahoma who doesn't know me should trust. Why should you trust what I say? Like, you can't verify firsthand anything that I'm telling you. But you can verify firsthand what the reporters in your newsroom are telling you because you can go out and see it in your community. If they tell you that, something is happening at your local school or in your community, like, you can go and see for yourself, is that true? Do I trust these people? Maybe that extends up and rebuilds some trust in our media. But if it's gone, you can't do that. And that, journalists are citizens like the rest of you. We're, in your community and live on your street and send our kids to your kids' school, and maybe we're your doctor, and, if local newsrooms aren't there in communities building that relationship, teaching our kids, this matters, this is part of our community, this is how we understand what's happening where we live, then the trust or lack thereof filters up. And I feel that. I think it's real. I think there's probably too many journalists in Washington and New York these days, and not enough out and about in the country and in the world telling stories that I can't get to from my studio. It really matters. And again, I will say once again, I wish y'all could all come sit in on our 9:30 meeting with the number of stories that get pitched that are big abstract policy stories, and the first questions we're asking is, what town, what state, what city can we go to tell that story? Because it's the human story. That's the only thing that matters in the end.
And the thing that I'll tell all of you is because of you and because of the contributions that you make to public media, that network of journalists on the ground in communities across the country is the largest of any network that exists, any news network that exists, and the most spread out in communities. And I think that that is something really powerful that we could not do without you.
True. Amen.
So if we're sitting here 10 years from now, what do you hope the media landscape looks like? And what role do you hope that NPR and the journalists and public media play in reshaping that? Because we're at an inflection point.
Yeah. We'll be on whatever, iPhone 475 version by then. So we'll all be streaming things at the speed of light and beyond. But I think the core values I very much hope remain and persist. The commitment to telling the stories of our community and generations in a way that resonate with us as human beings and as citizens. I hope that the ability to have an open-minded civil conversation, even maybe especially with people we really disagree with, and have a forum for that, because how boring would it be if you only heard people you really agree with on NPR? That would be really boring radio. And it doesn't mean we need to platform liars. It does mean we need to hear from the whole spectrum of people in this country and around the world, and I hope that that forum and an audience for it persists. I hope that I get really hip on whatever the 10th generation from TikTok and Instagram will be, and I'm live tweeting, every little thing and in interesting ways that my, then 20-something kids will actually want to pay attention to. I hope that we are still relevant in that way in the national conversation, and I hope very much that the relationship between the national network, reporters who are out in our country and communities, and then our foreign correspondents who are around the world who are connecting America to everything that is not stopping just because we are in a moment of chaos in this country, and connecting us to those stories that we're healthy and vibrant and we have the funding to support that kind of journalism.
I'm curious, as we wrap up, what is, if there is a story that escaped you, that you're still chasing, what is that story? I think we all have one.
I have a few. I'm trying to think which one to tell you.
I mean, you can share more than one. I'm not going to
yeah.
cut you off. There's no post. There's no time post.
So I said earlier that one of the kind of lines I've tried to respect is when the job comes into conflict with my obligations as a mother, that my kids win. And that is real. And I am 99% really happy about the way that those decisions have landed and happy to live with the consequences. But I will say that I have done a fair bit of coverage from Russia and reporting out of Russia, and would really like to interview Vladimir Putin one of these days, but had a request in for the head of Russian foreign intelligence, like Russia's answer to the CIA. It's called the SVR. It's when the KGB split, they split domestic and foreign, and this is the foreign wing of what was the KGB. And this guy, needless to say, does not give interviews, and he certainly doesn't give interviews to American reporters. It just doesn't happen. But for whatever reason, people pick their moments when they want to talk, and for reasons that will forever be opaque to me, at the height of all of the interest in Russian interference in our elections, I went through the motions of putting in a request for this guy to see if he would talk. Absolutely certain we would never get a response. And to my amazement, he wrote back and said, "Sure, I'll sit down and talk with you at SVR headquarters in Moscow. Here's the date." And it was like the next week. And so my producer and I scrambled to get Russian visas and lined up the whole thing. And we were all systems go. And then they came back to us. He had had a schedule change. He was honoring the interview request, but he needed to move the date. And the date he moved it to was smack in the middle of a really long planned family trip that was impossible to join in the middle. It was all or nothing for various logistical reasons. And I had promised my kids I would do this trip, and we'd planned the whole year around it. And I just thought, how do I turn down the head of Russian intelligence in Moscow at headquarters, his first interview ever? I can't remember, but he didn't talk. And I did, because I said I'm going to honor my commitment. I promised I would be there for my kids. I'm not going to break my promise. So I turned it down, tried to reschedule. He, of course, never came back. There was never another date, and he's since stopped replying. I'm very proud to have prioritized my kids and my family, and it was a great family vacation. And someday when I am 100 years old and wobbling across this stage, I will be hitting my head on this table in frustration that I did not make it to Moscow for that interview. You win some, you lose some.
Is there another one?
No, I don't know that there's another quite so pronounced example. I will say that I do walk out of, to this day, still, just about every interview that I do kicking myself, like on the way back to my office. I wish I'd asked this. I wish I'd pushed them harder on this. I wish I'd followed up on this. I will be in my hotel room tonight brushing my teeth thinking, you know what the white whale that got away that I should have said when Rachel asked me was tonight? And I will have a brilliant story, and I will share it with you tomorrow so you can share it with everyone.
Yeah, we'll do a PS on the air.
Yeah, PS.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you tonight that you would like to share with this audience?
Oh my goodness. This has been a great interview, and not only is it a deep pleasure to escape Washington these days, to go anywhere outside the Beltway, to get on a plane and just blow Dodge for a little while, but I've loved the questions you've asked. I love the questions that the students that we met with this afternoon were asking. It gives me hope that there's all these really smart people who want to do what we do and find value in it and are going to find really interesting new ways we haven't even dreamed of getting stories and checking facts and getting the truth out to all of you. And again, I've said so many times tonight, I wish y'all could come to my 9:30 meeting. I wish they could be here and see the support for our journalism and your journalism and what we can do together. So thank you. Thank you for hosting me.
I want to do one bit of trivia, and then we're going to do this thing. Mitch, where are you? Come up here. Okay. And so the one bit is because, in Oklahoma, we're a little bit of an underdog state, but you do have a connection to this state. And I don't want to forget that because it's a very random bit of trivia, and, what else is more public radio than random bits of trivia? That you have a connection
you
to
would
Oklahoma.
like me to show?
Yes,
I thought this was
yes.
like a map test where
No,
I was
no,
going to have to
no, I'm not
locate-
pulling out a county map of Oklahoma to be like, where are your people from?
Because that one I would have failed.
I'm sorry.
My grandfather was born and raised in Prague, Oklahoma, and his mother, my great-grandmother, Gladys Heffley White, lived there her whole life, and so I have various cousins and great-aunts and uncles who are now sprinkled around Oklahoma. One of them, my cousin Dean, it's actually my mom's, I think her first cousin, so whatever that would make him to me. He showed up totally unannounced. I hadn't been in touch with him in ages, and I did a speaking event in Tulsa earlier this year or last year, I can't remember, within the last year. He showed up, they said, your cousin is here. And hi Dean, and he was here, and he had brought me this pink gingham cooking apron that was my great-grandmother's and what she had cooked in all those years when she was raising my grandfather in the house in Prague, and now I have it, and it's in my kitchen, and I cook in it in Washington every night. So it has been really nice to come back, and I hope to come back and see a little bit more. We didn't have enough time to look around this trip, so next time.
It's a busy news cycle these days. Thank you all so much for coming tonight, and I do want to remind you, ArtDesk has generously provided copies of the magazine, and they are on your way out, so want to make sure that you get those. And please support independent local journalism, because this has been a year of really big emergency fundraising, but the reality is that the uncertainty is next year and the year after and the year after that, because the rescission was a permanent one, but the need for news and information will extend year after year after year. And so I can't thank you enough for standing with us in this moment of uncertainty, because we didn't know what was going to happen. And I can't talk about it too much because it will make me tear up, because you have provided support in the form of cookies, in the form of contributions and messages, and just amazing gestures of support for journalists at KOSU and KGOU. I see Dick in the audience tonight, and we can't thank you enough as a public media community for all that you've done. So thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for joining us in our very interesting group photo experiment. And thank you so much.